6:30.
Good evening, everyone. Seeing that it is 6:30 p.m., I will call the May 11th, 2020 Planning Commission meeting to order. Let the roll reflect that Commissioner Roberts is absent and the other commissioners are present virtually via Zoom. As you know, government agencies, schools, businesses, and organizations around our country are being asked to take extraordinary measures to protect our communities from the spread of COVID-19. The City of Burnsville is committed to complying with recommendations from the CDC and the state and federal governments to protect everyone's health. Current recommendations call for everyone to practice social distancing as much as possible. To comply with these measures, tonight's Planning Commission will be held virtually by using Zoom. As chair, I will be leading the Planning Commission meeting, and the public is welcome to participate when invited throughout the meeting. Additional instructions on how to participate are posted online at www.burnsvillemn.gov in the public meeting calendar. As usual, tonight's meeting is available for viewing on BCTV and on the city's website. If you are unable to participate this evening and would like to submit public testimony, I encourage you to send your comments to City Planner Sarah Madden at sarah.madden@burnsvillemn.gov or City Planner Deb Gross at deb.garross@burnsvillemn.gov, or mail your comments via postal mail to 100 Civic Center Parkway, Burnsville, Minnesota, 55337. You may participate in the meeting tonight online by going online to https://zoom.us/join and use the meeting ID 958-840-2178. Once you are logged into the meeting, please use the chat feature to tell the moderator which item you wish to speak to. You may also call into the meeting at 651-372-8299. For each public hearing, I will provide an opportunity for callers to speak to that specific item, and I will provide more instructions then. Your call will be muted until that time. So now moving on to the agenda. The first item on the agenda is adoption of the agenda. Staff, any changes? Commissioners, any changes? Seeing none, is there a motion? Commissioner John.
I'd like to move that we adopt the agenda for this evening.
Is Commissioner Anderson.
I second.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, can I have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Anderson,
Aye.
Commissioner Awad,
Aye.
Commissioner Henderson,
Aye.
Commissioner John,
Aye.
Commissioner Timmerman.
Aye.
Okay. So the agenda is approved. The second item is to approve the minutes from the April 27th, 2020 Planning Commission meeting. Staff, any changes?
None from staff.
Commissioners, changes? Okay, seeing none, is there a motion? Commissioner Anderson. Do you have to
I
unmute
move to
yourself?
approve minutes.
Commissioner Awad.
I second the motion.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, motion carries. Oh, can I have a roll call, please? I'm sorry.
Commissioner Anderson,
Aye.
Commissioner Awad,
Aye.
Commissioner Henderson,
Aye.
Commissioner John,
Aye.
Commissioner Timmerman.
Aye.
Okay, motion carries. So moving on to the third item of the agenda, it is a public hearing for the City of Burnsville for a zoning ordinance amendment to Title 10, zoning, to add a new chapter entitled TOD Transit-Oriented Development Zoning District, presented by planning consultant from WSB, Aaron Purdue.
All right. Thank you, Madam Chair and commission members. It's nice to be with you this evening from Zoom. I'm happy to present the completed draft of the transit-oriented district tonight for public hearing purposes. You'll recall our last discussion on this draft ordinance was in January. And since then, there has been some staff review, comments, and a few changes to that draft that you had seen at that time, which I'll start with. So thank you for advancing the slide. To kick us off, just to review some of the changes since the previous draft. We have a new building type that we have included called cottages, which is basically to represent detached townhomes. Staff brought to our attention that there was an adjacent detached townhome development adjacent to the TOD district, and we wanted to make sure that the TOD could potentially accommodate that type of development. And so we came up with a new cottage building type, which I'll show you here in just a few moments. We have a new use group also called activities. Activities is meant to include any public or private facility that can be used for small gatherings, daycare centers, community centers, health clubs, things like that. Another change we made was to move the employment use group from conditional uses to permitted uses. We do specifically reference the performance standards that are elsewhere in the ordinance that would be obviously required for employment uses, but those have been moved to the permitted category in order to help facilitate a mix of uses. And something that we heard from our focus groups was that there was a need for more employment opportunities in the area. We made sure to add farmers markets and mobile vendors to the list of accessory uses in the district, and those would be subject to the separate ordinance standards that you already have. And finally, we added placemaking elements to those items that are required under pedestrian-oriented design, which are in the general standards for the TOD district. Placemaking elements are described in the ordinance, and they can include things like public art, parklets, or plazas, and those types of spaces have been required in the HOC district in the past. So can I have the next slide, please? Great, so now for public hearing purposes, I'll give an overview of the ordinance as a whole. Next slide. Okay, so first of all, just a little recap of where we have been in the process. We started off with a kickoff last summer and spent some time assessing your existing code, researching some best practices, and then doing public engagement last summer and fall. We went to a couple of work sessions with the Planning Commission and the EDA, and also did some testing of the draft ordinance to make sure that the placement standards, the landscaping standards, things like that were actually doable on the parcels that are remaining in the TOD district. We had some focus group meetings. We brought our focus groups back in November to give us some feedback on the draft. We had another joint meeting also in November. And then since we presented the draft to the Planning Commission in January, as I mentioned, there has been a lot of staff review. There was an online survey that we conducted back in December to get general public comments on the draft ordinance. And based on all of that feedback, we're here tonight to present the draft for public hearing. Next slide, please. Okay, so the table of contents and the way the ordinance is organized begins with the purpose and intent statement, which is like all of the other zoning districts you have. We have a section on administration, which outlines opportunities for projects to be reviewed administratively rather than just everything coming to the Planning Commission and City Council for review. So there are opportunities for administrative review. We have definitions that apply just to this section. And then we get into the meat of the ordinance with the regulating plan. The regulating plan is a map, but that also links to street types, building type regulations, and then all of the lot requirements and uses that go along with them. And then the final section are the general standards, which include all sorts of miscellaneous regulations that apply to all of the street types and all of the building types in the district. Next slide, please. Okay, so in that administrative review section that I mentioned, we have an outline of when a proposal could be evaluated just at a staff level, rather than being kicked to the Planning Commission or City Council. And if the proposal meets all of these requirements, then it could be approved administratively. So it has to be the right building type, it has to be a permitted use, and the proposal has to meet all of the building placement, parking and access requirements, and all of those general regulations that are in the general standards section. There are, if the proposal requires any exceptions, then that would be something that has to be reviewed by the Planning Commission and the City Council. Anything that is on the conditional use list would need to come to the Planning Commission. If there's an expansion of a nonconformity, or if an applicant wanted to appeal an administrative review, all of those instances would come back to the Planning Commission per the standards in the ordinance. Next slide, please. We have an attachment to the ordinance which will help guide people in using the ordinance. As I mentioned, we start with the regulating plan, which is really the basis for all of the rest of the regulations. An applicant or a property owner would find which street type the project fronts. Then you would go down to the lot requirements and make sure that the lot meets the minimum requirements. Next, based on the street type, you can find out what building types are permitted on that street type. And then you get down to the uses, and within the use section, we have specific use groups described, which I'll go through in a minute. And then finally, those general standards that I've referenced a few times. The next slide, please. Okay, so here is a picture of the regulating plan. As you can see, all of the streets, all of the existing streets, and those in the dotted lines are indicated in the comprehensive plan as potential future streets. So those have been classified also on our street types A, B, or C. And then all of the rest of the regulations in the TOD district are based on, again, on what street type the project has frontage on. Next slide, please. So here we have an illustration of the lot requirements. So kind of moving through that, how to use the ordinance guide. Here we have the minimum lot requirements for area, width, and depth. These are all the same as is currently in the heart of the city district, but we've now included some illustrations so that it's clear how all of those are measured. Next slide. Okay, then as I mentioned before, once you know what street type your project is on, you can take a look at this table to find out what building types are allowed. And we have what was 4 and now are 5 building types. Those are mixed use, multifamily, townhomes, cottages, as I mentioned, which are essentially detached townhomes, and then 100% commercial or office buildings. And depending on the street type, different mixes of buildings are permitted. Next slide. We then have each of the building types illustrated. The ones you're seeing on the screen now are the commercial office building and the mixed use building. There are also information next to each one of these that describes the regulations for each type of building. Next slide. Here we have a multifamily residential building type, the townhome building type, And then finally, the cottage building type, which is again the detached townhome product down there at the bottom. It is our intent, once the ordinance is adopted, to develop single page handouts that will have the building types illustrated and then all of the information you need to know for that particular building type all on one sheet so that it's easy to understand and easy to use. Next slide, please. Okay, here is a second illustration that shows the building placement and parking placement requirements. So here, the letters on the illustration match the letters that are in the table. So D, E, F, and G, the build to line, the rear setbacks, that sort of thing are illustrated on the diagram. And then we have setbacks and build to lines listed in the table. And again, those are the same as are currently in the HOC district, but we're just illustrating them a little bit differently here with the idea that they will be easier to use. Next slide, please. This illustration shows the frontage requirements. So again, how much of the building is required to be at the build to line. That's 65%. There's also a maximum amount of parking that we have that can front on a lot. That's 65 feet as long as it's screened. And again, those are requirements that come straight from the HOC. So a lot of the specific regulations are carried over into the new TOD district. Next slide. We've taken a different approach to regulating uses in this district. And so rather than have a lengthy list of every conceivable use that we might want in the district, we have instead defined several use groups. And this is intended to allow some flexibility. It allows the ordinance to be adaptable as we move forward, and there may be uses that come up that we haven't thought of yet. This allows for that type of flexibility. So the use groups that we have defined are shown in the blue box on the left there, all the way from shopping and dining to open space and recreation. Sexually oriented businesses are defined here as they are elsewhere in the ordinance. And so then what we've done is grouped those use groups into permitted, accessory, and conditional. And so you'll see that most of the large use groups are actually permitted in the TOD district. That again was by design so that we can make a mixture of uses the easiest outcome in the district. There's an asterisk near residential, which is a discussion item that I'd like to get some feedback from you this evening. As the ordinance is written right now, we have excluded first floor residential on building types that are fronting on Nicollet or Burnsville Parkway. And that's a discussion item that I would like to get your thoughts on. The reason that it's in the draft as it is right now was the thought that Nicollet was a particularly active street, the way it has been developing and the way it's designed. And so we would like to reserve the first floor of those buildings for more active, engaging uses than residential. And Burnsville Parkway, similarly a very active street, but also wider, higher speeds, more limited access. And so again, the thought there was to prevent first floor residential, but that is open for some discussion. Under the accessory uses, as I mentioned, we have farmers markets, mobile vendors, several other types of uses, including some that are related to the employment uses. So repair, processing, some limited warehousing and distribution is allowed in the district if it is accessory to one of the listed permitted uses. So we wouldn't allow just a warehousing and distribution center in and of itself, but if it was associated with another permitted use and it was accessory, then it would be allowed. Some of the conditional uses, sexually oriented businesses, drive-throughs on street type C. That's another item that we wanted to discuss with you this evening, so we'll come back to that. Places of assembly and larger residential group homes. Next slide, please. And then back to those general standards. Basically, everything that applies district-wide in the TOD is found in the general standards. So we have a required density range here, which corresponds to the density range in the comprehensive plan. We do have a minimum floor area ratio. We have reduced the general parking standards by 25% because this is a transit-oriented district. There will be hopefully fewer cars and fewer automobile trips than in other districts. And we do have requirements for long and short-term bicycle parking. Next slide. And then the rest of the list of items in general standards, I mentioned the pedestrian-oriented design at the beginning. That describes specific requirements for walkways, crosswalks, any way that a new project can link into the public realm. I mentioned earlier that the inclusion of placemaking elements, and then we have the rest of the standards: landscaping, loading, trash handling, and the design and building material standards. I will mention that the design standards and building materials have also carried over from the HOC, so we have not made any changes to those. Next slide. Okay, so in addition to any general comments, questions, or concerns that you might have about the ordinance, we did want to get your feedback on the first floor residential exception that we have included in the ordinance, and also whether or not we wanted to allow drive-throughs at all. Right now, they are listed as a conditional use and are only allowed on street type C. But again, we would, after discussing this amongst staff, we decided that that was an issue that we would love to get your feedback on. So with that, I would stand for questions, comments, and I'll look forward to the discussion of those issues.
Great, thank you. Commissioners, any discussion? Commissioner Timmerman. You need to unmute yourself.
That won't be the last time. Some questions and discussion. You asked for our input and feedback regarding the first floor exclusion of residential. You know, my gut reaction to that is that is fitting for Nicollet and less so for Burnsville Parkway. But I do know that in the past we've had discussions about there being challenges filling in overabundance of retail space at the ground level. And so I'm concerned about that a little bit, especially if we are limiting residential on Burnsville Parkway and Nicollet. So I guess for me, I would say if we were to look at this, I would not like to see it limited on both streets, maybe just Nicollet, or allow the market to dictate and determine best uses of that first level. I know that with our existing buildings, we have some vacancy problems at the street level, and hopefully with further development of transit-oriented development in this particular zoning structure, those problems will be eliminated or at least reduced. But I'd hate to exacerbate them by creating basically a restriction that really the market could determine. The question I have for you, and that's just commentary for now, the question I have for you is related to the existing businesses. And that is, did we do some type of survey, or do we have any information on the existing businesses in the hopefully to be approved TOD district? Do we have information regarding those existing businesses, and if any of them would need to be or would be classified as approved non-conforming?
Commissioner Timmerman, we did take a look at that issue. We didn't talk to all of the businesses, existing businesses individually, but all of the, we haven't come across any business that would be considered non-conforming in terms of use at this time. Anything that would be non-conforming in terms of the site would be considered a legal nonconformity and would be allowed to stay as it is with no changes. We did, talk a bit about what it would mean if people want to upgrade their sites and how conformance could be incremental. And you have some language in your non-conforming section of your ordinance, the general ordinance about that this would fall back on. So we don't intend to create any non-conforming uses that would then create problems for the business owners that are there now.
Thank you.
Commissioner John.
Thank you, Madam Chair. One thing I was wondering in the current, well, let me start with saying the reason I don't think a first floor residential is a good idea is because where the buildings are set on the pathways, and how close they are to the windows, the people looking in, et cetera, like that. I was recently in Boston. That was something I noticed on anything that was lower level. The building is so close to the pathways. It's a peeping Tom's dream, if you will. And I don't think it's a very comfortable situation for people. But in the current ordinance in the HOC 1, is first floor business or residential, is that a use currently?
I believe it is, yes. I think there are some restrictions on where it can be placed, but it's not completely prohibited. And it's not prohibited on entire streets. I think there are a couple segments where it's prohibited.
Yeah, if I may add, there's some additional requirements that if residential is on the ground floor, that it have some sort of like walkway up to it, or it's like raised a portion of like a half a level or something that addresses it not being directly at that first floor, some modification.
Commissioner Awad.
Thank you. That was a great presentation, and I was excited to see the cottage building type added into the mix. I had a question about pitched roofs, and I don't know if I missed this in the draft presentation, if there was a pitched roof requirement to the townhouses and cottages, and just what is the reasoning behind the pitched roof?
I'm just making sure I'm not muted. Excuse me. Yes, there is a pitched roof requirement that carries over from your current HOC district, and the intent is to make sure that the townhome building form is definitely residential in character and not either more industrial looking or like some of the more modern multifamily structures that are multi-story and have flat roofs. So that was the intent, that it was a little bit more like a row house or a traditional residential type. Again, that was carried over. But
okay, that's carried over from before. So is pitched roof, is it a peaked roof, or can you have is a pitched roof just, or is it not really defined whether it's a gable or just a pitch?
It's not defined, so I think it could be either one. It's not restricted to a certain roof type.
Okay, I just want to keep the options open for my architect friends.
Sure.
I had another question about the drive-through. Drive-throughs, I mean, is the bank the drive-up teller, is that considered a drive-through, or is drive-through more defined by fast food?
The drive-through would include banks and pharmacies, so that's part of the reason for the discussion.
Okay. It seems like, at least in my opinion, drive-through makes more sense if it's closer to 35W, the 35W Burnsville Parkway interchange, and maybe the portion on on Aldrich Avenue on the west side and kind of southwest side of this district, where it's basically a frontage road. Those seem to be more like potential drive-through type properties. So I don't know about eliminating it entirely. I think you want to, if you can eliminate it from the the more pedestrian oriented elements of the plan, that would be better. And those are my only questions.
Commissioner Anderson.
First, I'd like to say thank you very much for the presentation. I was just wondering, when I'm looking, when we're discussing the idea of residential, living on the first floor for Burnsville Parkway and Nicollet Avenue, one thing I was wondering about, when I'm looking at the map, it shows street type A for Nicollet Avenue, but then if you look on the map, that covers basically north of Burnsville Parkway, but south of Burnsville Parkway, there's still part of the map that's there, but Nicollet Avenue is not considered street type A there. So I'm wondering if that same, if we decided that first floor, yeah, right there. If we decided that first floor residential was not allowed on Nicollet Avenue, would that extend south of Burnsville Parkway?
That's a really good question. I think you've pointed out a spot in the map that we need to make sure is colored. I think the intent was that Nicollet Avenue south of Burnsville Parkway would be the same street type, but that that restriction on first floor residential would be for the whole thing. Now, we could discuss just making the restriction for Nicollet north of Burnsville Parkway. That's certainly an option.
Okay, because I know right east of that is definitely residential right there. So I just wanted to make sure that that wouldn't be an issue, or something got redeveloped south of that Nicollet Avenue too. So I did also have another question that I was hoping you could help me out with. I was just kind of curious. Detached townhomes or cottages, can you explain a little bit more what that is in comparison to just say, I mean, when I saw the illustration, what's different between that and just a standard house? Is it the lot size? What exactly is the difference?
Yeah, essentially the cottage building type is just like a small house and on a smaller lot. So there's an adjacent development just northeast of the Cub on Travelers Trail, where that building type that's sort of what we were trying to replicate and make sure that that could happen in the TOD district. We didn't want to unnecessarily restrict it. We're not sure if there are any parcels that are large enough to really facilitate it, but you never know. Sometimes people are creative. So
Sounds good. I just wanted to make sure, because that actually makes a lot of sense, because I know exactly which houses you're talking about. So excellent. Thank you so much.
Yep.
Commissioner John.
Yeah, I just wanted to touch up on what Commissioner Awad was talking about with drive-throughs, and I agree with having more drive-throughs closer to the freeway, obviously. And I believe the current regulations are in the TOD district. Is anything on a C-type street, correct? That would have a drive-through. And anything that currently has a drive-through would obviously be grandfathered in.
Right.
So which would be an unfair advantage for somewhere like the CVS. If the Walgreens wanted to come in, they wouldn't be able to do it. So I almost agree with keeping it with the drive-throughs, although, gosh, a lot of those streets, it's really tight going through there, and you can see all kinds of safety issues when it comes to drive-through. And that's the only part where I'd hesitate just a little bit.
the way the ordinance is currently written, yeah, they're only allowed as a conditional use on street type C. So not on every street, but.
Mhm.
Commissioner Timmerman. You need to unmute yourself.
See, I promised you that. Ms. Dean, did you have something? Okay.
No, I do not.
Okay. So as far as the drive-throughs go, I'm just envisioning what's happening right now on Snelling and St. Paul and in some of these other areas that are really getting upgraded to mixed use. I'm not entirely sure what they call that zoning district in St. Paul. But there is a lot of congestion caused by drive-throughs in some of those newer developed areas. And so when I'm envisioning Nicollet, I see potential issues with allowing drive-throughs directly on Nicollet. CVS is a unique specimen because it's in a huge parking lot of private property. And I think that what we might see down the road is that huge parking lot being redeveloped because we are trying to allow more dense development in the area. And so it's not an issue now, but it could become an issue down the road. So I guess for me, I'm okay with allowing existing drive-throughs and trying to leave conditions on those on certain street types. I mean, yeah, CVS is unique. You're right. I mean, I think Commissioner Awad hit the nail on the head. If there were a coffee shop in some of the new apartment complexes that are on the southern frontage of State Highway 13, those might actually be good for a drive-through, but I think those are classified as C. Is that correct? Okay, I'm seeing nodding. So I guess just the way I'm visualizing it and looking into the future, I think that the way it's written is, it feels appropriate. The other comments I wanted to make, could we bring the map back up again? Thank you. So I'm looking at this and I don't see on here, but we were talking about Nicollet Avenue south of Burnsville Parkway. And I'm bringing that all the way down to the next east-west road. I don't know the name of that road. But it looks like on the west side where we don't have color, where it's kind of opaque, it looks like we have apartment complexes, and then even further west of that, which is still faded out, it looks maybe like parking. I'm wondering why we haven't moved the TOD all the way down to that east-west road and allowed for the legal nonconformities on those existing properties. It's much more clear on the east side of Nicollet because it looks like those are single family homes, residential, probably R1 zone. So it makes more sense there. But on the west side, I'm curious, why didn't we bring down the TOD a little bit further south and square it off?
I can speak to that, Aaron. Commissioner Timmerman, Chair. So as you move south, those properties are primarily Ridgeview condominiums, and they're all individually owned. It certainly gets a little more complicated just from the property ownership standpoint. But the kind of we saw that as a natural break in the different land uses. Also, we didn't want to get too far from the future Orange Line stations. So when you think about transit-oriented development, you want to stay within generally about a half-mile radius, and also look at your barriers that you have also, like highways and major pedestrian impacts. And so that was a factor too. Again, natural breaks in land use or property ownership, but then also what we see as linkages to those future stations. So heading any further south, you're really looking at going beyond that half-mile radius. The reason why we extended, not answering your question going beyond, the reason why we extended the transit-oriented development area to the west of 35W is because there will be a station at Burnsville Parkway and Travelers Trail. And then it was also studied in our comprehensive plan to extend the to extend transit-oriented development west of Burnsville Parkway. So that's why you see those, the area west, which was not originally envisioned for part of the city 1 or 2, expanded into that area. But again, kind of those two factors, natural land use breaks and then property ownership primarily, and distance from those future stations.
All right, thanks, Ms. Dean. I'm just as a follow-up, I'm curious, what is the small property? And that makes a lot of sense with those individual ownerships of the condos. But what is the smaller property just the east of Harriet Avenue that is gray?
I'm not exactly sure.
Yeah, I mean, it almost looks like parking. I could probably look it up on Google.
If I may, that is a smaller, like condo to townhome association development.
Okay. All right, that makes sense. So it sounds like it's consistent with the decisions that were made on the other piece. So thank you very much.
Any other discussion, commissioners? Okay, then moving on to the public hearing. However, before I open the public hearing, I wanted to state that if you wish to speak to this item and are on the Zoom meeting, please use either the chat feature or raise your hand feature, and the moderator will put you in the queue. Once I call your name to speak, the moderator will unmute you. Then please state your name and address for the record. And with that, I will open the public hearing at 7:11 p.m. Okay, it doesn't appear that anybody wishes to speak about this item. So then I will open it to people who are calling in on the telephone. If you wish to speak to this item, please press *6 to unmute yourself and state your name and record. State your name and address for the record. And it doesn't appear that there is anybody calling in on the phone. So with that, I will close the public hearing at 7:12 p.m. Is there any other discussion, commissioners? Commissioner Timmerman.
So Planning Commission, are we kind of understanding that the only thing that we are looking at based on our conversation right now is whether or not we're going to allow for first level residential? It didn't sound like there was anything else beyond that that was too contradictory to us.
Mm-hmm. Commissioner John.
I agree. I think the biggest, it sounded like we were all on the same page with C-type streets having drive-throughs and none other. It's the first level, and whether Burnsville Parkway has the first level or what Ms. Dean was talking about with it being raised, that does help, obviously, in my perspective. However, and I get what you're saying, Commissioner Timmerman, about not having, instructing what the who's going to occupy that first level and letting the market decide. But I'm still leaning to letting businesses be on that first level, especially on those two roads. I don't know what anybody else feels about that, or if anybody else has an opinion they'd like to share.
Commissioner Timmerman. You need to unmute yourself, please.
Glad I can entertain you all tonight. Commissioner John, I don't think that we're limiting the businesses being on that first floor. I think it would just be allowing either through an allowed use or conditional use the residentials there. At least that's how I was hearing it.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to make it sound that way. I meant limiting, like you were saying. I apologize.
Okay.
Commissioner Awad.
Thank you, Chair. I think is it allowed in the mixed use building? So if it's a, we're talking about buildings that are going to have a mixed use, a mix of business and residential. Is a residential allowed on the first floor of those streets? So it's, if it's going to be a apartment building, it wouldn't be a restriction on a building that's just housing, is my understanding. Is that correct?
The way the ordinance is written is that you would, so if you wouldn't have any first floor residential on those two streets, even if it was, so it would essentially have to be a mixed use building, not a multifamily building.
Okay.
On those two streets. So that's why the question. So I've heard, leave the restriction as it is. There was some discussion of maybe just having the restriction on Nicollet and not Burnsville Parkway. And yeah, again, keeping in mind that we would keep the same design restrictions that are in the HOC now if we were going to allow first floor residential.
So are you are looking for us to make for some direction on whether it should be allowed or not?
Yes, I mean, the way it's written, the way it's drafted right now, first floor residential in new buildings is not allowed on Burnsville Parkway or on Nicollet. We could be more specific about Nicollet north of Burnsville Parkway. Yeah, I guess the question is the commission okay with that, or would you like to revise that in some way?
Commissioner John.
And the reality is on Nicollet, most of it is already built up at this point. And we're looking just south of Burnsville Parkway. There's the one building there that would be in question as far as Nicollet's concerned. Burnsville Parkway, there are some spots that could probably change on that, I assume. So I don't know. Commissioner Anderson, how do you feel about all that?
Well, I'm thinking that for Nicollet Avenue, I don't have a problem with that being in the ordinance saying you can't have a first floor apartment building, because the sidewalks are so close to the buildings. Like you're saying before, you'd see right in them unless they got their blinds closed all day long, and that's not something most people would like to have for a home. But when it comes to Burnsville Parkway, the setback for where you would be building compared to where those walkways are on Burnsville Parkway, I think there wouldn't be nearly as much of an issue. I mean, when I compare that to the areas that are just outside of the zone, so if you go east on Burnsville Parkway, east of Nicollet, all those apartment buildings, I mean, they're pretty far back. You definitely wouldn't have any issues. You can't see in those. So I mean, if the development in the area ever went kind of like the development just to the east of it, I mean, I don't think there should be an issue with first floor apartments on Burnsville Parkway. But yeah, Nicollet Avenue, I think would be a pretty bad idea to have first floor apartments.
Commissioner Timmerman. You need to unmute yourself, please.
Stop laughing, Mr. Anderson. Now thinking in the future a little bit, and to piggyback off Commissioner John, I think there is some redevelopment potential in some of the parking areas and even in some of those strip mall areas on Nicollet. That being said, the idea of this is to make it a walkable community, a bikeable community where people want to be out and shopping. And so I really do think that having a thoroughfare on Nicollet where there's a little bit more of kind of a retail life and you get that ground floor business. I like that. So I think just through more discussion, I'm leaning more towards agreeing with what Commissioner Anderson just said, and that is, really restricting it to businesses only on Nicollet, and then, allowing based on the development, the developer's choice on Burnsville Parkway.
Commissioner Anderson. You need to unmute. There you go. Commissioner Awad.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree with my fellow commissioners that so should we make an amendment to the recommendation? Is that kind of the next step in the process if there's no more discussion?
Yes, I would say if you would like to make a recommendation, or you could include that in your motion, in your recommendation to council, to make that change. It sounds like the only change would be to remove the restriction for first floor residential on Burnsville Parkway. We could certainly do that on the draft that goes to council.
Okay. I will propose the motion that we recommend to the city council approval with the ordinance, but removing the restriction for first floor residential along Burnsville Parkway.
Is there a second? Nick Anderson. Oh, I'm sorry, Commissioner Anderson.
I second.
Any further discussion? Can I have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Anderson,
Aye.
Commissioner Awad,
Aye.
Commissioner Henderson,
Erica. Oh my gosh, it's been a long day. Sorry. Aye.
Commissioner John,
Oh
Aye.
my gosh.
Commissioner Timmerman.
Aye.
Okay. So motion carries, and this item will be on the City Council's May 19th meeting agenda. So moving on to item 4, that is to hold a discussion on the 2020 Planning Commission Work Plan item, the City Code Title 10 zoning, Chapter 7 general provisions related to farmers markets and temporary seasonal outdoor sales uses presented by the Economic Development Coordinator, Jamie Schaefer.
Thank you, Chair. Can we get the next slide, please? All right, so as Chair mentioned, this is a 2020 work plan item brought to you for first discussion today. We did engage with consultant Northwest Associated Consultants to do the background research on this item for us. And our goal is to simplify the ordinances and to encourage more farmers markets and community activities in Burnsville. Next slide, please. The research included an assessment of our current codes, general overview of farmers market needs, and an analysis of 12 market communities, plus Bloomington, Minneapolis, and St. Paul. They were analyzed for their permit types required, site plans, what zoning districts they're allowed in, hours and duration restrictions, performance standards, and layouts. Next slide, please. Compared to the market cities, Burnsville appears to be less flexible in some cases, but also more flexible in other cases. Next slide, please. For the less flexible areas, the permits, the site plan we require, the limit to 1 day per week, and the performance standards, especially the site and parking requirements, were less flexible in comparison. Next slide, please. So where we were more flexible is that we did not require project narrative. We allow farmers markets in more zoning districts. And currently there are no requirements on the hours of operation. So the recommended changes on a high level deals with the fact that we have 2 sections in the code. Section 47 deals with farmers markets, and Section 48 is the temporary seasonal outdoor sales uses. Farmers markets are defined as 20 vendors or more that sell produce, and the restrictions in that section are much stricter than the other section. So the general recommendation is to repeal section 47 and to make changes to section 48 to include farmers markets and to simplify the requirements within. Next slide, please. So we're recommending to add temporary seasonal outdoor sales and farmers markets as an accessory use in R1 and heart of the city, and to go with a graduated setback. In the farmers market section, it currently reads that the setback needs to be measured from the property line of any residential zoned property. So this is more flexible in that it measures just from the nearest residential building. And 1 to 19 vendors, we're recommending 100 feet for the setback. 20 plus vendors, right now it's at 200, but we are reevaluating that to ensure that the current farmers markets will meet that. So that might go down to 150. We are also recommending a more detailed application and site plan, which will allow us to eliminate those stricter parking restrictions that I mentioned earlier. A couple of those examples are for farmers markets. Right now, they can only locate in a parking lot that has 500 or more spaces, and they cannot locate in a restaurant parking lot. And we're recommending to change that to being an owner decision for that. We are also recommending to increase the days per week for farmers markets from 1 to 3. This would allow, for example, a weekend market Friday through Sunday, and to limit the hours of operation from 8 a.m. to 7 p.m. This is a stricter recommendation, but that's to respect any neighboring properties, especially residential ones. We're recommending to allow them in R1 for exempt only, which is churches, schools, and government on their own property. Commercial, heart of the city, mixed use, and industrial. Initial outreach, we did reach out to the farmers markets and grocery stores in Burnsville, let them know we're discussing this tonight and there's an upcoming public hearing. And we have not had any comments yet from anybody. So that was my high-level overview, and we have some questions that can help guide your discussion. Are you comfortable with the proposed changes? Are there any additional changes you would like to consider, or anything you want researched further?
Great, thank you, Ms. Sheffer. Commissioners, any discussion? Commissioner John.
Yes, Ms. Schaefer, welcome to the team. It's good to meet you, even though it's virtually. My question is this because of demand? Is there more farmers markets wanting to participate? Are they looking for different locations? The reason I ask, I only know of the one, or is this just an ordinance cleanup altogether?
I think I'm going to defer to Regina on that question.
Thank you. So we have had just a number of inquiries, not only from people wanting to do farmers markets, but then also from our policymakers as well. And then also people that are currently, I would say, farmers markets or seasonal sales, trying to figure out the ordinance itself, like where do they fit in? They will go to our ordinance and look and be confused, so then they call city staff and we try to navigate them through the city code. It's like, well, okay, which one do you fall into? I'm not really sure, maybe this, maybe that. So really from a number of, I guess, standpoints. One, we're just looking to make the ordinance more user-friendly, easier not only for our customers, but then also for city staff as well to implement, to understand, and to enforce if necessary. And then also from a policymaker standpoint, there's been some general counsel discussion about let's have some fun events within the city. Let's be more flexible on not only farmers markets, but the kind of outdoor events, the outdoor markets, the winter markets that they see in other cities, that they want that possibility to occur also in Burnsville. A lot will be driven by the property owner, and if the property owner will allow this on their property. But we wanted to give the option to give it to have that availability should someone want to do some things unique on their property. We do have the two farmers markets, the St. Paul Farmers Market, one at Mary Mother of the church, and then also within heart of the city. But then you have your seasonal sales like the Seavers markets, or there's a different company now, but they have their farmers markets. So you see the plant sales, or the pumpkin sales, and the tree sales, and again, we just wanted something. Hopefully, the direction will be to have something that's more streamlined and more user friendly.
So I'm sorry if I can follow up real quick. So that would include like the Cub Foods having pumpkins out, or having the plant sales they have out in the parking lot, or Home Depot. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Commissioner Anderson.
I was just wondering a couple of the details. You had mentioned introducing 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. timeframes for that. I was kind of curious, does that include setup time? So like, would they be allowed to start only at 7, or are they allowed to get there earlier for something like that? Is that like an issue at all?
I believe there's some language in there that regulates the setup time as well in the residential zone. I can't remember it off the top of my head. I'll try to find it here.
And that's something as a commission, if you, at this point, we're looking for some direction. Right now, there's a draft ordinance in front of you, but, we're looking for your feedback also. Does that seem too restrictive? Is that not restrictive enough? So we're looking to you as well for some feedback based off of your own experiences.
So like right now, there is no restriction on starting and end times, correct?
That is correct. And I did find it. It's 7 a.m. for the setup time. It can't start before 7 a.m.
Okay.
in a residential area.
Have there been issues with them going too late or starting too early? Do people complain about the farmers markets? I'm just kind of curious why we would, a lot of the things we were mentioning kind of opens up the options of having more farmers markets, more opportunities there, but then there's that thing, at least right there, is trying to limit at least a little bit. Is there a particular reason for it, or just want to make things even, open up, make it a little harder?
When the consultant did their review, they found that regulation in some of the market communities. And with the reduced setback, I think we're just trying to preemptively avoid any issues with surrounding residential properties. If your house was 100 feet within a market, do you want to hear them at 7 a.m.? That kind of a thing.
That's understandable.
Yeah.
I did have one other question too. Did I hear that right, that it can be in a retail parking lot but not a restaurant parking lot, or did I mishear that somehow?
Currently, the farmers market section regulates that a farmers market cannot be in a restaurant parking lot, and we're recommending to remove that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just checking.
Commissioner Awad.
There we go. Thank you, Chair, and a great presentation. You mentioned one of the more restrictive requirements that other communities have is a project narrative for their farmers market. I'm just curious, what does that mean? Yeah,
there was one community that required that, and I think that would just be written verbiage describing your market.
Okay.
Basically, what you're filling in your application, written out in paragraph form.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else, commissioners? Okay. Well, although this is not a public hearing, I will ask if there are any members of the audience wanting to speak. As a reminder, if you are on the Zoom meeting and would like to speak to this, use either the chat feature or raise your hand feature, and the moderator will put you in the queue. Once I call your name to speak, the moderator will unmute you. So see, doesn't look like there's anybody wishing to speak, and it doesn't look like we have any people calling in on the phone either. So, commissioners, any other comments? Commissioner Timmerman.
I just wanted to say thank you, Ms. Schaefer, and welcome. The section that you've put together that itemizes staff comment and staff response to the different, I'm assuming, recommendations or suggestions from the consultant. I really like that. I like seeing the detail of the staff opinion. I think that our staff, even more so than our planning commission, has the ear to the ground on a daily basis. And so I really appreciate the detail in your comments that you provided. So great job. Thank you.
Commissioner John.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think this all makes sense. Having two competing ordinances doesn't make as much sense, and this is a great cleanup, good reason to clean up. So I think as it's written, it sounds good to me. If the rest of the commission feels the same way, I think they do. So I will go ahead and make a motion. And
So if I may interrupt, so because this item is just discussion at this point, we don't necessarily need a formal recommendation, although you can make one. And what we're looking for essentially is direction on the next step, which would be a formal public hearing. So we would bring this back to you on May 26th in that final ordinance format, any minor modifications based off of our codifier review, and then you would be making your formal recommendation to City Council at that time.
is there something else you wanted us to discuss that we were missing there? I think that covered everything.
Commissioner Anderson.
I would just like to say thank you very much for bringing this to the commission today. I am very much in support of the idea of anything that expands the opportunities for farmers markets in our community, especially once everything settles down from COVID-19. It would be great for more things like that to be out there for people to get together. So thank you very much.
Commissioner Awad.
Yes, I just want to second and third the Commissioner John and Commissioner Anderson's support of this. Thank you.
Okay. So the last item on the agenda is updates. Staff, any updates?
Yes, so your next virtual via Zoom Planning Commission meeting will be on May 26th. There are currently scheduled 2 regular items on the agenda. The first will be the ordinance that you just had in discussion format, a public hearing bringing forth the ordinance drafted for the Planning Commission. And the second item will be a conditional use permit and plat for an auto sales lot with Emetchen Properties. And you can read more about that on the development map on our website.
Great, thank you. Commissioners, any updates? Okay, doesn't look like there's any. So I just wanted to remind everybody that members of the public may submit additional public comment relating to the items on this evening's Planning Commission meeting agenda until 4:30 p.m. on Friday, May 15th, 2020. These comments will be included with the City Council background for consideration at their May 19th, 2020 meeting. With that, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
I didn't catch who that was, so Commissioner Awad.
So moved.
I'll second Commissioner Timmerman's motion to adjourn.
Okay. Sounds great. Any discussion? Seeing none, can I have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Anderson,
Aye.
Commissioner Awad,
Aye.
Commissioner Henderson,
Aye.
Commissioner John,
Aye.
Commissioner Timmerman.
Aye.
The motion carries and the meeting is adjourned at 7:39 p.m. Thank you, everybody.